Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Chris, and welcome to Linux Tech Geek. And today we're going to be installing Gentoo Linux. For those of you that don't know, Gentoo Linux is a source-based distribution, which means all the programs that you download, you have to compile from source. It's a little bit different from, let's say, Ubuntu, Arch, Red Hat, binary-based distributions. Now, I'm not going to be installing Gentoo on actual hardware. I will be installing it on a virtual machine, and number one, because I wouldn't be able to film this video if I was installing on actual hardware, and number two is because I already have Arch Linux as my main Linux distribution. Now, I am going to be installing this as close to the handbook as I possibly can, and I'll try to explain to you guys each and every step. And even though I'm installing this on a virtual machine, all the commands that I input should work for you on actual hardware. The only difference might be is the devices that I might have to use. So let's go ahead and flip over to the computer, and then I already have a virtual machine spun up. I gave it 12 gigs of RAM, and I gave it 6 cores of my 12-core processor. So let's go ahead and jump on in. All right, so we got our virtual machine running. We booted into the lab CD here, so we're gonna hit enter. I did go ahead and change the cores on my processor. In the intro, I said I gave it 6 cores. I changed that from 6 to 8. It's a little bit late right now, and I'm just trying to get this video done for you guys. So went ahead and changed that to 8. I gave myself more RAM. So we got everything going. Let's go ahead and let's test out network right away. So we can do ifconfig, and that ENP1SO, that is the Ethernet adapter. And that's how you can see if it picks up your Ethernet adapter or not. IWconfig, that would be your wireless adapter. We are in a virtual machine, so everything I'm doing is Ethernet. And to test out internet, to see if we do have internet, we can ping -count3 ... google.com, and as you can see, we got a successful ping, so we do have internet. If you guys are on physical hardware and you are having trouble getting like wireless or something connected to your router, check out a program called WPA Supplicant. It's personally what I use when I'm doing a live install on physical hardware. So let's get to the handbook. Go ahead and figure the network here. Pretty good with the network. We don't use PPP. We don't use PPP. So if you're on wireless, read the handbook on wireless, on your wireless stuff, and check out the WPA supplicant like I mentioned. You may have to write like a small config file or something, but it's pretty easy to do with WPA supplicant. All right, so that's all good. Name server, everything like that's good. Let's go ahead and prepare the disk. For our block devices, we are using SATA. So my devices is going to say dev/SDA. Now in physical hardware, I actually have this NVMe Express chipset. However, because I'm on a virtual machine, it's going to be SDA. You can do if you're unsure which one you have, you can do lsblk or lsblock, and you can see mine is right there. I gave this virtual machine 20 gigs of space, and there it is right there. So go down, we'll do the partition table. Now I am not going to be using GPT. I'm going to be using the DOS partition table. This is not a UEFI system. Most systems these days do use UEFI, so whenever there's a situation in this install that involves UEFI, I'll make sure to mention it to you guys. But for me personally, I'm going to be using the master boot record, or the MBR, which is pretty much the old way of doing things. So we can do a default partitioning scheme. This is pretty important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do fdisk dev sda right here. I'm going to type M for help. We need to create a new label. I am going to do a DOS partition table. If you're doing this on physical hardware, and if you need UEFI, you need to make this GPT. Or if you're doing what I'm doing, just use a DOS partition table if your virtual machine is DOS firmware. So we're going to hit O, create a new DOS partition table. We're going to hit M. We are going to add a new partition. We're going to make it a primary partition. We're going to do partition 1. First sector is going to be empty. The second sector, I'm just going to make this 512 megs. The handbook recommends 256, but always kind of like to double it, just to give a little bit more space, just in case you have more than one kernel installed or something, or if you have a lot of information in your /boot partition. So 512 is plenty. We're going to do M for help. Actually, we can just do N again. Do primary, partition number 2. First sector is whatever. Last sector, this is going to be our swap partition. Now, I did give us, what did I say, 16 gigs of RAM. I'm going to go ahead and just give this like 2 gigs of swap. And then we are going to make another partition, and this partition is going to be our root partition. That's going to be the remainder of the space. Now we do M for help. We need to toggle a bootable flag. So we hit A, and then we're going to select a partition. SDA1 will be our boot partition, so we need to select 1 here. Now, we also need to change a partition type, because SDA2 is going to be our swap partition. So we hit T, and then we select 2, and then we're going to hit L, capital L for list. And then we have some aliases at the bottom, so I'm just going to do swap, or I could hit 82. And now we're going to hit P to verify that we have everything written to the disk and it looks set. We're going to hit W to write, and now it quits. And now we are on to the second section. So basically we've done something similar to this table right here. But we just used 512 megs for the boot partition instead of 256. And we use the BIOS or legacy boot mode rather than the UEFI. This is where it becomes a little different. So if you are using UEFI, which if you're installing this on physical hardware and your hardware is semi-new, or if you're using a virtual machine and your virtual machine is EFI, then you need to make your boot partition, you need to make it a FAT32 partition. For the rest of us, the ones that are using the BIOS or legacy boot mode, as you can say, we can go ahead and make our boot partition extends 4 or extends 2 or something. So I just wanted to throw that out there because it's a little bit different depending on if you are EFI or if you're BIOS. So we done all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. Create our file system. I'm going to go ahead and just make extends 4 for boot and root, and then swap. So make fs extends 4 dev sda1 sda3 make fs make swap dev sda2 swap on dev sda2. Good. And this shows you like everything is on the minimum CD. So Btrfs, browserfs, whatever partition scheme that you want to do. Each one has its advantage and disadvantage. I just use extends 4 because it's kind of the default Linux partition or file system rather. So I think I have another Gentoo install, and it actually uses Btrfs as its file system for its root partition. Okay, so activating, we already did this, we did this. Mount the root partition. We don't need to create the we don't need to create this directory because it's already created for us. So let's go ahead and mount that. Mount dev sda3 mount Gentoo, and then we can verify that it is mounted with df-h, and you can see sda3 at the bottom right there mounted on mount Gentoo. We don't need to do this change mod 1777. That is for the temp. That is because we are not using a separate partition for temp. Temp will just go in our root partition. So let's go ahead and go to stage 3 here. Go ahead and double check the date. It's probably wrong. I would imagine it's wrong. So date, and now we need to making sure that our date is set right. So the way it does, the command for it is date, and then it's month, date, hour, minute, year. So I have the date at the top. It's the 25th today. So we do 9/25, and then it is 2:50 a.m. and then 2022 is the year. So got the date set right. I'm not really going to use this MPDD. This is just I think this synchronizes your time. However, every time I've ran this command in the past, it reversed my time to back to I guess either local time or hardware clock time or something. So it always kind of messed with, always had time skewed with it. So I'm not really going to use that NTPD command. We are going to choose a stage tarball. There are different tarballs. So I personally use OpenRC as my init system. The two init systems for Gentoo is OpenRC and systemd. Now, you may be familiar with systemd if you have used like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, any Debian derivative in the past. I even think Arch Linux uses systemd. However, Gentoo defaults to OpenRC, and systemd was something that came along way after OpenRC was already kind of built in. So I've never installed Gentoo using systemd. I've always installed it using OpenRC, and that's probably what I'm going to continue using until they deprecate OpenRC. So we need to download the stage tarball. So we need a change directory to our cd mount Gentoo. And then we need to use links. Links is a console. Well, it can be graphical too, but a lot of people use it for the console. It's a web browser. So it's links, and then we can go gentoo.org. I think it's downloads mirrors. I think that's the web address. It is. And now we need to go down and we need to grab this stage 3 tarball so that way we can extract it. Find a good mirror here. Okay, here we go. So we go to releases, AMD 64, because that's what we're on. Go to auto builds. Go to... We're going to do the current stage 3 AMD 64 OpenRC. And I know there is a lot of stage 3s. So you got AMD 64 desktop systemd stage 3. You got OpenRC, AMD 64 desktop. The one that we want is just stage 3 AMD 64. Stage 3 AMD 64 OpenRC. We want this file right here. So we can hit enter on it, hit enter again to save, hit enter again. It is going to download this. This mirror is a little slow. Yeah, this mirror is slow. I'll just let that download while we look at the manual here. So this part of the manual is we can verify if this is the right stage 3. It came from the Gentoo mirror list. I'm pretty sure that it would pass all of these checksums and stuff like that. But if you want to verify that your checksum, if you want to verify it, then feel free. But I'm going to trust the Gentoo developers and stuff to that it's the right stuff. And as soon as it downloads, we got to run this command right here, tar xpvf stage 3 x adders include numeric owner. I think it's done here. So we need a tar xvj xpvf xpvf stage 3 x attributes x adders hyphen include no hyphen include. Okay. Star period star period star right here, and then numeric owner. Pretty sure that's it. Looks good to me. Good. So while that's finishing untarring, we can go down. Now we're gonna get into the C flags and the optimizing GCC or the C compiler. This part right here is pretty vital because, like I said in the intro, everything in Gentoo is compiled. So all the software that you install, everything like that is compiled. So we need to optimize our compiler to take advantage of our computer's architecture. That way it gets the most from it. So we can use this March equals native flag right here, and that'll set a couple flags for the compiler, and then we can do this make ops. So and what make ops will do is it will give you parallel compilations. So all your compile times will be a whole lot faster if you do make ops. So as soon as that gets done, we're gonna flip over here. Now we are actually going to edit that file. So mount Gentoo etc portage make.com, and then our common flags, like I said, is March equals native. And then at the bottom here, I like to put this at the bottom. You can put it wherever you want. It's make ops equals J. Excuse me. I gave it 8 cores. They say that it's 2 gigs per core. So 8 times 2, 16. However, this virtual machine only has 16 gigs of RAM. So I'm probably going to do J7. And it'll take up 14 gigs of RAM, and that'll give the operating system itself 2 gigs while it's compiling stuff. So I think that's what I'll go with. That's the rule of thumb. So however many cores you give your parallel compilations, you need to add 2 gigs of RAM to that. So that's what the handbook suggests right here. Using a large number of jobs can significantly impact memory consumption. A good recommendation is to have at least 2 gigs of RAM for every job specified. So to avoid running out of memory, lower the number of jobs. That's kind of what I did ahead of time. Make ops equals J2. So mine's going to be J7. We are going to write and quit here. Now we are going to install the base system. So we're going to do mirror select IO, and then we're going to point at the make configuration. Mirror select I can type here, O. Mount Gentoo etc portage make.conf. What mirror select is it's going to allow us to select our mirrors for Portage. Ideally, we want to select all of the US mirrors. Just kind of what I do. I'm pretty sure some of these are faster than others, but I'll just select them all. And then if we cat mount Gentoo etc portage make.conf, you can see that all it does is write that information into our make conf. And now we need to make this directory right here, make directory parents mount Gentoo etc portage repos.conf. So make directory parents mount Gentoo etc portage etc portage repos.conf. repos.conf. I apologize if I am speeding through some of this, guys. But it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, so just trying to get it done. Next, we need to copy. We need to copy this repos.conf, and we need to put it where we just made that folder. So mount Gentoo user share. Okay. So we need to copy mount Gentoo user share portage conf, and then repos.conf to mount Gentoo etc portage repos.conf, and then gentoo.conf. I believe that's the name. Yes. And we need to copy this file right here, and we need to copy it in this folder right here, and we need to rename it to gentoo.conf. We need to copy our DNS information. That way we have internet when we root into our Gentoo install. So we are going to copy dereference etc resolve to mount Gentoo etc. And then we need to mount all of this stuff right here. So the proc, it's a pseudo file system. It looks like regular files, but it's generated on the fly. So pretty much we're mounting everything. Right now we're going to mount everything that the ISO mounted for us. And we're going to mount it to our we're going to mount it to the new to rooted environment stuff. So like right here we're going to mount the proc file system from the ISO. We're going to mount it to proc on mount Gentoo proc. If that makes any sense. So mount types proc, mount Gentoo proc. I believe that's it. Mount types proc /proc. So proc /proc mount rbind sys. The hell? No, /sys /mount. Okay. /sys mount Gentoo sys mount make r slave mount Gentoo sys make r slave mount Gentoo sys. Also, if you're wondering how like typing kind of all this like super fast, hit the tab key. Bash will autocomplete for you, and take advantage of that if you are installing this by yourself, or copy and paste, but typically I like to type everything out. Mount rbind dev. So mount rbind dev, mount into dev, mount, go ahead and mount rslave, excuse me, no, make rslave, mount into dev, mount bind run. So mount bind run, mount into run, and then make slave. Mount make slave mount Gentoo run. Pretty sure that's it. Yeah. All right. If you was installing Gentoo on a non-Gentoo medium, which means like if you was using the Linux from scratch CD to install Gentoo, or if you was using like Ubuntu or something and you was installing Gentoo, then you would need to do this right here. You would need to mount a tempfs and dev schm and all of that type of stuff. But because we are using the Gentoo specific ISO to install Gentoo, we don't have to do that. So we're going to chroot into our new environment. So chroot mount Gentoo, then bash. We're going to environment update. And it's going to give an error right there, but it's okay because we're about to fix that anyway. And then it wants us to do this export PS1. We don't need to do that. That just changes your prompt. So they give a good tip here. If the Gentoo installation is interrupted anywhere after this point, it's possible to resume the installation. So that's a pretty good tip, because from here on out, we're dealing with the install that will become the Gentoo Linux install. We got everything already done. So next things is just pretty much is mounting the file systems and installing the packages that we need, installing the kernel, configuring fstab, stuff like that, basic stuff. So this installation is not that hard. It's just you have to do stuff in order to to make it work. So we're going to mount our boot partition. We're going to mount it to /boot. That's where it goes. We're going to do this emerge rsync, or websync rather. What this is going to do, this is going to download a snapshot out of this is going to download a snapshot of Portage. So this can take a little bit, depending on how bad the mirrors are. Gotta get something to drink here. And then we're gonna do emerge hyphen sync. And this is going to actually update Portage. So the individual packages and stuff like that. Or the eBuild repository. So, blah, blah, blah. One good thing too that Gentoo does that a lot of distributions don't do is they always had like these newsletters that kind of go out. So if they're going to be migrating to, let's say that a package is going to be migrated to another package, or if they're going to be significantly changing something, they will send out like a newsletter, and whenever you update Portage, you'll get that like newsletter, and you can read that to, you know, keep up with what the developers are doing. So as you can see at the very bottom, I have 8 news items need to be read. So I can do eSelect, news, I can do list. I can type here. eSelect, news, list. So you can see at the very bottom, if I wanted to read one, I could do eSelect, news, read instead of list, and then I could select a number. So let's just select 5, for instance. And you can see they are talking about the Perl 5.34 upgrade or something like that. So I really do like that about Gentoo. How they really try to communicate, and documentation for everything that they pretty much do is excellent. Another thing that they do is they have profile list. Or they have profiles. So what are profiles? Pretty much profiles are a way for them to use use flags for you and stuff. So for instance, if you like GNOME or GNOME, then you could use this profile right here. I believe it's profile 6, and it's a stable profile, which means that it works. Or if you use Plasma, then you might use profile 9. If you use systemd instead of OpenRC, then you might use a different profile. And it's just a quicker way. I think it's like use flags and stuff like that. Me personally, I'll always stick to tiling window managers. And I like to keep things very minimum. So I'll always just stay on profile 1, which is the AMD 6417.1 stable profile, but you can select any profile you want to. I recommend that you stay away from the dev and the experimental profiles though, because the experimental can probably break your system, and the dev profiles are specifically made for the developers. So that's my recommendation, but you can go ahead and do whatever. And I've never used systemd, so I wouldn't have any reason to switch to a systemd profile either. So right here, they do give you a good warning on the documentation. Profile upgrades are not to be taken lightly. When selecting the initial profile, make sure to use profile corresponding to the same version as the one initially used by the stage. Which means that if you selected the AMD 64 desktop profile, make sure that when you done your stage 3 tarball uninstall that you use the desktop stage 3, not the 17.1 OpenRC one. So you can select different profiles right here. E-select profile set, same way that you read the news. I'm really not going to do any of this. So we do need to do this real fast. We're gonna go ahead and set the use flags real fast, and then we'll update world. So we will do vi etc portage make.conf. I don't have vi installed. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and install Vim real fast. Because I do not have VI installed. I don't like VI anyway. I prefer Vim or NeoVim. So whatever text editor that you prefer. I know some of you prefer Vim, some of you prefer Nano or Micro or VI, Emacs, whatever. You could go ahead and you could download that now. That way you can have it throughout the installation and throughout like editing configuration files. I find it a little easier to use a text editor that I'm comfortable with rather than forcing myself to use something that I really don't like to use. Not to mention VI isn't even installed. It is installed on the thing though, the CD, or the ISO rather, not the CD. And as you can tell, even though this is a source-based distribution, it installs packages relatively fast. Now, I did give this VM a lot of power, and I meant to do that because of how late it is. I wanted to get this done, but it's not bad. Now it's not as fast as Arch or Ubuntu or something like that when installing packages, but it's not bad at all. All right. So the next thing that we're gonna do is we are going to vim etc portage make off. Go at the bottom. Going to make use flags now. Use flags. What are use flags? This is kind of a hard thing to describe. The best way I can describe it is, let's say that you have a web browser, right? Now, let's say this web browser can be ran in console, but it could also be ran in X or Xorg, right? But let's say you don't want to install Xorg on your computer, but you still want to use this web browser, right? Because this web browser supports both of them. Well, Gentoo does something very unique, and it allows you to do essentially that. If I wanted to tell my web browser, hey, I don't want a specific feature that you have, I don't have to install that. So I don't have to install X. In fact, not only can you do this globally, so everything that you say in your etc portage.makeconfig is global, which means that the whole system uses it. However, you can set individual packages to use these specific use flags. So for right now, like I told you, I don't use GNOME, I don't use Qt5 or Qt4, I don't use KDE, I don't use Plasma, I don't use none of that. So, I'm going to tell my virtual machine, or I'm going to tell my Gentoo install, whenever you install a package, don't install anything or support anything that has those use flags. So I'm going to say minus KDE, because we don't use KDE. Well, I don't use KDE. You might use it. And I'm not narking anybody that does use GNOME, KDE, Plasma, or anything. I just personally don't do that myself. I prefer very minimalist, tiling window managers, stuff like that. So I don't use nothing that's big and bloated or anything. I don't use GNOME, so we're going to do minus GNOME. We're going to do minus Qt5, because we don't use that. We do use ALSA, so I'm going to keep ALSA in. And we do use X, but I'm not going to put X in yet, because the more use flags that you put in here, when you reconfigure world, it will populate. So when we do the next command that I show you, the more stuff I put in here, the more that it's going to like add, if that makes sense. So I'm going to keep it pretty small and pretty generic right now. Now in the future and in future videos, we will be adding onto like our system. But for right now, I'm just going to keep it pretty small, pretty minimalist. So no KDE, no GNOME, no Qt5. Looks good to me. Right, quit. Now we do emerge as verbose. That's what the -v stands for, verbose. And we're going to do update deep new use at world. So we're going to do update deep new use at world. So what is world? World is everything that is recorded when you install a package, right? So everything that you install on Gentoo gets recorded into a file called world. And this is what enables Gentoo to, I guess, test against certain versions, right? Because let's say that you install Firefox 10, but Firefox 11 comes out. Well, this is how Gentoo, I guess, would see, like, oh, this person, like you have Gentoo 10 installed, Gentoo 11 is out. Do you want to update it? I hope that makes a little sense. Gentoo is a little different from any other distribution, like I said. but that's kind of how they do it. Now, I believe they have world and they have at system. I never update at system, but world is pretty regular. Also, anytime that you start messing with that etc portage.make and you start messing with use flags or anything like that, then world starts to grow. And the more stuff you have installed, the more that you might have to reinstall or update or something like that. So as you can see, I don't even have that much stuff installed or in my use flags, but you can see right now that we are going to do 5 reinstalls and 3 upgrades. So we're going to go ahead and hit yes. This should not take that long. So I can read some of what it says. So they call world the world set. They don't even. They just call it a set. The world set, also referred to at world, encompasses the system set and the selected set. And I guess these sets are like what's installed on the system. This is also how you what we just did right here too. This is also how, like, if you was on Arch Linux, you would do like sudo pacman syu. This is kind of the equivalent of syu, right? This is updating the system or upgrading the system. This new use flag right here, this tells emerge that there's new use flags. There's, and then update is update the system. In deep, I forgot what -- deep stood for, but I'll have to look that one up. We don't have to do any of this grep info, grep use. So if you run this command right here, this would tell you every use flags that's on Gentoo. And I'm going to tell you right now, there is a lot. I would not advise you to put every single use flags in your make config. I would not do that. A, that's a lot of use flags. And 2, you don't. The reason you want to use Gentoo is because A, it's different, and B, because you can control what part of the package is installed, right? If you put every use flags, you're basically making another Debian or another Ubuntu system, right? Like you're making another binary distribution, because you're putting, like, you're supporting every single thing in every single package. So I personally would not do that. But you do you. And so this right here, this nano portage.make, that's what we just got done doing, blah blah blah. Now there is another CPU flag that we could do right here. Uh, so we're gonna install this package. This package next. This is more compiler like optimizations. I, so emerge ask CPU ID to CPU flags. Is that it? Hey, I got it right first time. Awesome. That is a long word, by the way. Small package. We're going to echo. CPU ID. Oh no. Yes. CPU ID. CPU flag. Portage package 00 CPU flag. Okay. So etc portage package that use 00 CPU hyphen. The underscore is a hyphen. Hyphen. All right, I'll show you what that that made. So we'll cat etc portage package that use, and then that's all it does. So it puts more CPU features in this package.use folder. Some architectures, including AMD, blah blah, have a use expand variable called. Okay. So it's a expand variable to take advantage of more CPU features, which is always good. All right. Gentoo also does something pretty unique. In that it also has different licenses that you can accept via every package. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to write out what licenses that we want to accept. Me personally, I will accept any license. I know I know many of you may feel different, like you don't want proprietary software on your computer. You might only want GPL licensed software or EULA or free and open source software and stuff like that. So with Gentoo, you can tell the compiler, hey, if this thing is proprietary, don't install it. Or if this thing is not licensed under this license, don't install it. Me personally, I have a NVIDIA card on this machine, and I do use the proprietary NVIDIA driver. And I've used proprietary software in the past. But like I said, I know many of you probably don't like that, so you would have to make this accept license variable. Now, I'm going to accept all license, and the way that you do that is you just put a star like that. And that's going to accept all license. If you did not want to accept all license, then you can tell Portage what license that you want to accept. So right here, their example is they want to accept the free license and they want to accept the binary redistributable license. There's also the GPL compatible license. There's the free software, free documents, free the EULA. There is a lot of licenses, so if you want to handpick those, the ones that you want, you can, or if you just want to accept all, then just make sure they accept license variable right there has the star. So we are going to do the time zone. LS user share. Okay. We need to make a symbolic link to our zone, like our time zone. So we do echo America / Louisville, because I am on the Eastern time zone. And then I think it's time zone. Pretty sure that's what it is. ETC time zone. Yes, it is. And then we do emerge time zone data. Oh, I was supposed to do config. Config. I messed that up, but it's all right. It worked itself out. We just redid it. If you use on system D, this is when you would manually make a symbolic link. We need to configure our locale. So we do vim etc locale.gen. Now I recommend everyone having one UTF-8 locale. That seems to be the standard on most Linux distributions. Myself, I'm going to uncomment both of these. So DW. And then locale.gen. And now eSelect locale list set 6. So the only thing that I've done here is after I uncommented those lines, I did locale-gen to generate those locales, and then I used the eSelect command to list out the locales, and then to set the one that I wanted set system-wide. In my case, I wanted the English US UTF-8 one system-wide. And now we do .etc profile update that. Environment update. We good now. We don't need to do this PS1. That just changes your thing. Changes your prompt. All right, configuring the Linux kernel. We are almost done with this. So one thing with the kernel is there are like 4 or 5 different ways that you can install the Linux kernel on Gentoo. You can install the vanilla kernel that you would get from like the kernel website. You can install a binary kernel. You can install what's called the Gen kernel. Or you can install the Gentoo sources. Now, you must install Gentoo sources because a lot of the programs that you're going to download always look for Gentoo sources or to make sure user source Linux is there. However, you don't have to manually configure your kernel. You can have a binary kernel. It'll be binary. It's just like, Arch Linux or Linux Mint or something like that, how they do their kernels. You can do Gen kernel. What Gen kernel is it's the kernel config that is on the ISO when you boot up. So pretty much everything that works when you boot up this bootable ISO, it takes all that information and it'll configure the kernel for you and it'll use all that information. Or you can do a manual kernel install. I do not recommend, if this is your first time installing Gentoo, I do not recommend you guys installing your kernel manually, or configuring it manually, I should say. Number one, not gonna lie, it's pretty hard. You need to know a lot about your hardware in order to do that. You need to have a lot of time on your hands to do it, and if you screw it up, your operating system is not going to boot up right. Okay, so what I recommend you doing, especially if this is your first time installing a kernel, is I recommend you using Gen kernel. Now, as you gain confidence, that's when you can try, or when you have a backup kernel, that's when you can try to install the kernel manually or configure it manually. So we need to emerge as syskernel Gentoo sources. So emerge as syskernel Gentoo sources. So this is not going to actually configure the kernel. This is going to just install it. It's going to put the kernel in the directory that it needs to be. This is not actually configuring it. So we do have to have the kernel sources. Now, another thing is that in the handbook, it recommends you installing the Linux firmware. However, you need to have the Gentoo sources installed before you can install the Linux firmware. I don't know why they don't have these two switched around. But if you are on a AMD processor, then you need to install the syskernel Linux firmware package. What this will be patches and stuff like that for your AMD processor. So, in addition to discrete graphics hardware and network interfaces, CPUs also can require firmware updates. So typically this kind of firmware is referred to as a microcode. Newer revisions of microcode are sometimes necessary to patch instability, security concerns, or other bugs in CPU hardware. So install the Linux firmware package that will patch the kernel with any type of like patches, I guess, that your CPU might have. If you are on a Intel processor, then you need to install the sys firmware Intel microcode package. I am on an Intel processor, so I'm going to install the sys firmware Intel microcode. As soon as this gets done, come on, Kernel. No joke, I have been using Gentoo Linux. I remember the 2.x kernel. 2.x. 2.x was the first kernel I ever manually configured. The kernel now is almost to, well, I mean, it's 5.15.69 as of right now. That's pretty crazy. But let's go ahead and emerge, ask syskernel Intel microcode. Sys firmware. So, for those of you that are new, just understand that you don't have to manually configure your kernel, okay? And there are some elitists out there who think that if you don't manually configure your kernel, then you don't know what you're talking about or whatever. Manually configuring this stuff is it can be pretty challenging, so just don't feel like you have to manually configure your kernel. Do it when you start learning. So now we need to make a symbolic link. So we need to use the eSelect tool to select the kernel. So we can do eSelect kernel list. What? Instead of list, we're going to set one Okay. Now that we can just do source etc profile, honestly. So what we just did is, now if we go to user source Linux and we did ls, or so when we did the eSelect kernel set, what we actually did, the only thing that we did is we kind of created a symbolic link. So now user source Linux really is user source Linux 5.15.69. Important part, whenever you upgrade your kernel, you need to use that eSelect tool to make that new symbolic link. I don't know if that's in the manual or not, but it's a pretty good habit. So this part right here talks about manually configuring your kernel. We're not going to do that. There is a lot of information, and that's not even the start of it. Alternatively, and what I'm going to use is GenKernel. So GenKernel works by configuring a kernel nearly identically to the way the installation CD kernel is configured, which pretty much means that all of the hardware that the ISO picked up will work whenever you install the GenKernel, which is pretty good because that means that you don't really have to configure, like you don't have to manually go in and make sure that your mouse works, or make sure that your Ethernet card works, or your wireless card works. Okay, like if this stuff worked in the ISO, it'll work after you reboot into your system. So how we do this, we just emerge syskernel GenKernel. I'm pretty sure this is just a script because it's not very big. So syskernel GenKernel. I messed up on my spelling. And I did not do verbose mode. Yeah, I did. Or I say, did I do verbose? Pretty sure I always do it. Oh, it's installing the that line Linux firmware package. So I guess that's okay just to go ahead and install the Linux firmware package and the Intel microcode package. But as you can see right now, the Linux firmware package, it's pretty much all AMD stuff, which I don't use AMD. Kind of wish I did. Yeah, I'm pretty sure GenKernel is just a install script, because that was super fast. Okay, so we need to edit etc fstab because we need to make sure that GenKernel knows where to put the BZ image and the the images that Grub will use to boot the system, right? So we do vim etc fstab, go all the way down, dev sta1 boot extend 4. Right here, if you're using EFI instead of extend 4, you need to put vfat, because that would be the file system for your boot. If you're using extend 4, if you're using DOS like I am, then obviously put whatever file system that you formatted your disk with. But if you're using EFI, make sure the file system says vfat. Like this. It would look like that. I think it's 0, 0, 2. Now later on, we still have to configure this file right here, but in order for Kernel to properly know where to put those images and everything, that is why we need to edit this file first. Now here comes the longest part of the install. So the way we do it is Kernel. I can type. Kernel. And then we all. Depending on your hardware or whatever you're using, this could take anywhere from a half an hour to an hour to a couple hours. But this is the longest part about installing Gentoo Linux right here, is compiling the kernel. And that's one reason why I said to use like Kernel or a binary kernel, just so you're not wasting your time. Because let's imagine that you wanted to manually configure your kernel and you manually configured everything, so you spent hours doing that, and then you went to make that image your bootable image, and what if it failed? Like, you wasted a lot of time. So for your first couple installs of Gentoo, or if you're new to Linux period, just use Kernel. It's a good and it's a safe option. But I am going to pause the video. I will be back when this gets done. I don't know how long this is going to take. I'm guessing about 20 to 30 minutes. But I'll be back when it gets done. Alright, so we are back. We are done with the Kernel here. It is the next day. I fell asleep last night when installing the kernel, but I just let that go overnight. So it looks like the next thing that we need to do is we need to edit the etc fstab. So let me verify that right now. So we don't need any modules that we need to auto load or anything like that at boot time. So the next thing is the etc fstab. All right, so I'll explain etc fstab. So these are your partitions that will be mounted at boot time. Obviously, you always need your root partition to be mounted, and you don't have to load the boot partition, but just understand that if you don't let your boot partition auto mount at boot time, anytime that you do anything with grub, or if you install a new kernel or anything like that, you do need to mount the boot partition manually. I just let the boot partition load at boot time, and also understand that the if you're using the EFI system, your boot partition needs to be this VFAT right here. Now I am not using that. I am installing the Grub bootloader onto the MBR or the master boot record. This is pretty much how everyone did it, you know, prior to the EFI way. So let's go ahead and look at this. And they actually recommend too that if you have a solid state drive or an SSD, or if you're using the NVMe, to go ahead and put this no ATIME flag right here in your etc fstab. Now, I went ahead a minute ago and I did it. So I have my boot right here. I have swap right here. And I have root right here. And you can even do like a label or a block ID number if you choose to. I don't really like to use the UUIDs. I just like to use like the conventional like dev, you know, whatever block device I'm trying to mount. So now that that's done, let's right and quit that. That looks good. And next, we need to do networking information. So we need to set our host name. So that's etc confd.hostname. So it's vim etc confd hostname, and I'm just gonna name my local host. I'm gonna name it I'll name it Gentoo virt. But you can name it whatever you want, just whatever you want your system to be called, pretty much. And next we need to emerge DHCP-CD, and we need to add it to the default run level. So we're going to do emerge ASP net -misc DHCP-CD. And what DHCP-CD is, it is a DHCP daemon. And this will allow you to get an IP address from like your router or your modem or whatever. So you do need this package. And we can add this to the default run level. That way, whenever the system boots up, you get an IP address immediately, and you don't have to run DHCP-CD manually every time that you reboot. So, RC update, add DHCP-CD, and then we put this at default. And now it's going to want us to start the service. However, the service is already started, but I'm going to do it anyway just because that's what the manual wants. So, as you can see, we did get the error right there saying that it failed to start because it's already running. And then if you are on System D, then this is how you would add DHCP-CD to the default run level. I mean, this is how you would start the service up with System D. So we're going to configure the network. Actually, we need to install this right here. Emerge as no replace net ifrc I recorded that into the world folder. And next we can do some networking stuff. However, I'm going to kind of skip it because I don't need a static IP address. I get one dynamically from DHCP-CD. However, if you guys do get static IP addresses, and you would know if you do the static IP address, then you would edit this configuration file right here called etc.confd.net, and you would put in all of your information. All right, so next we need to make a symbolic link from one of our network. I guess that's a loopback like card. It's like a virtual card, and then to our real network card. I think that's what the net LO is. So the way we do this is we cd into etc.init.d, and then we ln-s. That's how you make a symbolic link, and we link net.lo to our actual Ethernet card or device. Now, before we do this, I want to explain that this net.etho, no one is probably using etho anymore. Most everyone is using the ENP3SO or whatever. And how you check the one that you're using, just type ifconfig. So as you can see right here, mine is ENP1SO. So we do ln-s net lo, and then we do net.enp1so, and that will make our net enp1so. I guess it's a file, whatever. And then now we can add that to the default running level, so that way we don't have to manually do this after the computer boots. And this will give us like an automatic IP address and stuff. So rc update add net.enp3, and then we add it to default. So you can see we add it to the running level, or default running level. Next, we need to configure the etc host. So the way I do this is just vim host, and then I'm just going to make this Gentoo virt, pretty much the same thing that we made our host name, and then we are done. We do not have PCM CIA anymore. If you're on a very, very, very old laptop, you may still have this, but I highly doubt it. They need to update the handbook a little bit more with the newer hardware, because I don't think anybody uses that anymore. We also need to set the root password. So the way we do this is passwd, and I'm going to give it a long and convoluted password. So we don't really need to edit this etcrc.conf. This is just to configure some of the services that's going to boot up at start. That's going to start at boot up time. We don't really need to worry about key maps because we're using basic key map. If you're running a dual boot system, you may need to edit this etc confd.hardware clock file and set the clock to local. Or else you may get clock skew. Now, on this virtual machine, like I said before, this is the only operating system that I'll have on this virtual machine. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep it set to what it's set to. But if you was using like Windows or maybe 2 versions of Linux or something like that, and you was starting to get clock skew, check that hardware clock file. And next, we are going to do a system logger. So I'm just going to go with the default syslogd. So we're going to do emerge, ask verbose syslogd. Let that install, and then I think we need to add this to the default run level as well. RC update, add syslogd default. And next it's going to, alright, so next up it's going to want us to install a cron daemon. Now what a cron daemon allows you to do is to run certain tasks, and you can run them, you can have them set, you know, for every single day at like 9 o'clock, for instance, right? Like if you install, like if you do a full system upgrade every night at 9 o'clock, most likely then you could use a cron daemon to kind of do that for you. I don't really do that. Everything that I do it pretty manually. So I'm going to skip down installing that. However, I am going to install this file indexer, and what this allows you to do is you can type in like mlocate certain package or certain program or whatever, and it'll tell you where it's located. It's just like the locate command, but I think it's a little bit faster. Actually, it does. It looks like it does use the locate command, but I think mlocate like has like a database. It's just file indexing. So we're gonna let that install. Next up is SSH. I don't really use SSH. This is a virtual machine, like I said. So if you guys do use SSH, and you want to have the SSH daemon start at boot time, then you could do this RC update, add SSHD to default. Or if you was on system D, then you could do this system control enable. So let's go ahead and update the database here for mlocate. This is going to take a second. Next up are these init tabs, or serial consoles. I'm not too concerned about that. I'm not going to edit any of that stuff. Next up is time synchronization. So we are going to install this. So emerge ask netmisc roni. And then we want to set this up at default run level. It's important to use some method of synchronizing the system clock. Okay. So this should be pretty fast here. So we're going to do crony daemon, the default. Next up is file system tools. Now, if you're using the extends 4 or extends 3, extends 2, whatever file system, you don't need to install the E2FS progs. However, if you are using like ButterFS, ZFS, RiserFS, XFS, then you need to install the corresponding package with that file system. And then I would also recommend you installing the DOS FS tools. In fact, I'm going to install the DOS FS tools. And this is just so that way you could, like if you need to format like a thumb drive or something like that, and you need to format it for both Linux and Windows, then this will give you the tools in order to do that. Okay. Installing. We have already installed DHCP-CD. Alright, so we already installed this earlier. We don't need PPOE. That's pretty old, like dial-up modems and stuff like that. This is also where that you would install wireless tools and all your wireless stuff. So there's this net wireless IW package, and there's the WPA supplicant package. I highly recommend, if you are planning on using wireless, until you get like network manager, applet running and stuff like that. And if you just plan on using like console, install the WPA supplicant package. It's pretty easy to use. In fact, I have to use it whenever I install Gentoo on physical hardware, specifically on this laptop. I have to use that. All right. Next up is the bootloader. This is we're almost done here, so this is pretty good. So one or two things with the bootloader. If you are using EFI, you need to put this grub platforms variable inside your make.conf. Okay? This will enable EFI support when you emerge grub. If grub does not have EFI support, then whenever you go to install grub onto your boot device, it's just not going to work. So EFI needs to be, grub needs EFI support if you are going to be using EFI. Now I am not going to be using EFI. So I'm going to skip this step right here. Emerge sysboot grub. So sysboot grub. So here comes the pretty much another challenging part in this install, and really the part that's pretty stressful, at least stressful for me, and that is installing grub onto the boot device. If you are using EFI, then you need to run this command right here, grub install target x86 64 EFI, and then give it the EFI boot directory. However, if you're using BIOS or MBR for master boot record, then you just install grub like this. Now, this is the way I will be installing grub because I am not using EFI. So, this might be, you know, so the command might be different from you than it is for me. Yeah. And we're going to let grub go ahead and install. Shouldn't take too long here. And then after we install grub, we will be running the grub make config, and that'll make the actual configuration for us for grub. And then I believe after we do that, I think we're pretty much done. Yeah. So we just got to install this, and then we're done with this install. There's some alternatives to grub too if you don't want to use grub. I think everyone just pretty much uses grub as a bootloader. Lilo, I've used Lilo in the past. Actually, I used Lilo in Slackware Linux a long time ago. But I haven't ran it like in a very long time. There's also this EFI boot manager. I've never used that. And then there's also Sys Linux. I've never used that either. The only thing that I've pretty much used is grub, and I used Lilo in the past, like I said, but that's pretty much it. So this looks like it is almost done here. Let's go ahead and full screen this. Well, actually, we don't need to, because we're almost done. Oh, also, if you are planning on dual booting with Windows or another operating system, then you need the sysboot OS prober package. And that's because the OS prober package, that's what probes your other partitions to see if they're bootable or not. So in my case, I'm not running a dual boot, so I'm not going to install that package. But if you are going to be dual booting, make sure that you download that package. And I think there's a file that you have to edit with the OS prober too. I'm pretty sure you have to set something to true or false or something like that. I've done it once or twice, but make sure you download that if you plan on dual booting. All right, so let's go ahead and install grub. Grub install dev sda. That's the MBR from my device. Install finished. No errors. That's the good thing. That's what we want to see. And next, we want to do grub make config. So grub make config -o boot grub cfg. So boot grub .cfg. Pretty sure it's cfg. Yep, it is. And it found our Linux image and our init rd image. And it made the file like we needed to. So I'll kind of show you what it makes real fast. So boot grub.cfg. So it just writes all of that for you, which is pretty handy. And next, I think we just unmount everything and we are done. So let's go ahead and exit. Change directory. We're going to unmount L. Mount Gentoo. And then I know it's something weird. SHM. Yeah, it's /SHM/PTS. I think that's how you do it. What? Oh, /dev. Okay, I forgot the dev. Okay. So unmounted all of that. And then we unmount mount Gentoo. So unmount, capital R, mount Gentoo. And we reboot. Now, I'm going to go ahead and stop the VM real fast because, actually, no, I don't need to. I'm pretty sure it just booted the my hard drive. I thought it was going to boot the ISO again, so but there we go. We have a working Gentoo Linux install. Let's go ahead and log in here. Let's check for network. So let's run ifconfig first. Okay, we got ifconfig, and our network device picked up. Let's check for internet connection. And we have a working internet connection. This is great. And this is pretty much, from this point on, like, whatever you installed, that's what's on your system. Now, I am going to go ahead and make a quick user real fast, just showing you guys how to make a user, because most people are not going to be constantly running root. So I'm not going to install sudo or anything like that, but I am going to make a regular user. So the way we do that is this user add command. A VM just crap out on me, or what happened? I think my VM might have just crapped out on me. So virt-manager, it is running. I want to, let's force it off. All right. We're going to open it, run it again. I'm not going to run this in full screen mode. I do apologize about that, but sometimes these things do happen. All right. So let's go ahead and log in as root. again. And we're going to do this user add command. So it's user add /m. See, it's whenever I /m/g. It's whenever I switch workspaces, the VM starts crapping out. Don't know. But user add /m/g, and then capital G stands for groups. So we want the wheel group. We want the audio group. We want the video group. We want the users group. Is that it? We can add more. Yeah, we could add more groups later. But that looks good. So the wheel group, that allows you to SU into root. That's very important. The audio group is for audio. The video group is for video. And the users group, that's for like regular user. All right, and then we do -s bin bash for our shell. And next up is our user. So I'm going to make a user, Chris. Powered username. All right. I did not like capitalization. That's fine. And next, we need to make a password for the user, Chris. So we do password, Chris, and then we make it complicated password. Ah, didn't like that. It's too short. All right. So we updated it. Gentoo does not allow you to make too short of passwords. So go ahead and log in as Chris. And there we go. That is it. We are done. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you guys do have any questions, or if you guys are having trouble doing something, feel free to leave me a comment down below, guys, and I'll get back to you, and we'll try and get the problem resolved. But until next time, I want you guys to take care, be safe, and peace.